They say you never truly understand fear until you witness something that breaks every rule you thought governed reality. For Captain Elena Vasquez of the Galactic Survey Corps, that moment came not when facing the razor-toothed predators of Kepler 442b, nor when her ship's oxygen systems failed in the void between stars. It came when she watched two human beings fight each other with a savagery that made the universe's most dangerous creatures look civilized. What she witnessed in the forgotten colony of New Carthage didn't just challenge her understanding of humanity. It redefined what horror truly meant. Because the most terrifying monster isn't the one hiding in the dark corners of space. It's the one hiding in the heart of the person standing next to you, waiting for the right moment to emerge. This is the story of how Elena Vasquez learned that in a galaxy full of wonders and terrors, the greatest threat to humanity has always been humanity itself. Captain Elena Vasquez pressed her palm against the cold metal of the observation deck's viewport, watching the planet New Carthage slowly rotate beneath her ship. The world looked peaceful from orbit, its green continents and blue oceans resembling Earth so closely that homesickness tugged at her chest. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. "Still no response from the colony?" she asked without turning around. Lieutenant Marcus Chen shook his head, his fingers dancing across the communications console. "Nothing, Captain. We've been broadcasting on all frequencies for the past 6 hours. The automated systems are responding normally, but not a single human voice." Elena had been exploring the Outer Rim territories for 8 years, establishing trade routes and diplomatic relations with alien species that most humans couldn't even pronounce the names of. She'd negotiated peace treaties with the Crystalline Zephyrians, survived 3 separate attempts at assassination by the shape-shifting Mordaki, and once spent 2 weeks trapped in a cave system with only recycled air and emergency rations while waiting for rescue. None of that had prepared her for the silence that greeted them in New Carthage. The colony had been established 15 years ago by a group of agricultural specialists and their families. Over 3,000 people had made the journey from Earth to start a new life on this fertile world. The last communication from New Carthage had been received 8 months ago, a routine supply request and progress report. Everything had seemed normal then. The crops were thriving, the population was healthy and growing, and they'd even discovered several native plant species with potential medicinal applications. "Take us down to the primary settlement," Elena ordered, finally turning away from the viewport. "Full precautions. I want biohazard suits for the landing party and constant communication with the ship." Dr. Sarah Kim, the expedition xenobiologist, looked up from her tablet where she'd been reviewing the colony's medical records. "Captain, if this is some kind of plague, we should consider establishing a quarantine perimeter before." "I've considered that possibility," Elena interrupted. "But 3,000 people don't just vanish without leaving some kind of trace." "We're going down there to find out what happened." The shuttle ride to the planet's surface took 45 minutes, during which Elena found herself staring out the small porthole at the landscape below. Everything looked normal. The agricultural fields were laid out in neat geometric patterns, the roads were clearly maintained, and she could even see vehicles parked in orderly rows near the main settlement buildings. It was as if someone had simply pressed a pause button on the entire colony. "Landing zone is clear," reported Sergeant Torres, the team's security chief. A former military police officer with 20 years of experience, Torres had seen his share of strange situations. But Elena could hear the tension in his voice as he guided the shuttle toward the colony's landing pad. They touched down with barely a whisper, the shuttle's engines cycling down to idle as Elena and her team of 6 prepared to disembark. Each team member wore a full environmental suit equipped with air filtration, communication systems, and emergency medical monitors. Elena had learned long ago that preparation was the difference between coming home and becoming another unsolved mystery in the galactic database. The first thing that struck her as they stepped out of the shuttle was the smell. Even through the filtered air of her suit, she could detect something sweet and cloying, like overripe fruit mixed with something she couldn't quite identify. It wasn't the smell of death exactly, but it made her stomach turn nonetheless. "Atmospheric readings are normal," reported Chen, consulting his handheld scanner. "Oxygen levels at 21%. No toxic gases detected. Whatever happened here wasn't atmospheric." The colony's main street stretched out before them, lined with neat prefabricated buildings that housed everything from residential units to shops to a small medical center. Solar collection panels gleamed on every rooftop, and automated irrigation systems continued their programmed cycles, keeping the decorative gardens green and healthy. But there wasn't a single person in sight. "This is unsettling," murmured Dr. Kim as they walked down the empty street. "Look at the vehicles. Keys are still in the ignition. Doors are open. It's like everyone just stopped what they were doing and walked away." Elena paused beside one of the abandoned vehicles, a small electric transport used for moving supplies around the colony. The driver's door hung open, and a cup of what had once been coffee sat in the cup holder, now covered with a thin film of mold.
Personal belongings were scattered on the seats. A child's toy, a work tablet, a half-eaten sandwich that had long since spoiled.
Sergeant Torres, take Chen and Kim and check the residential areas.
Elena ordered.
I want to know if there are any signs of struggle, any indication of what happened to the colonists. Dr. Kim, I need you to collect samples of everything. Air, soil, water, any organic matter you can find. What about you, Captain? Torres asked. Elena pointed toward a large building at the end of the street. I'm going to check the administrative center. That's where they would have kept all their records, communication logs, security footage. If there's an explanation for this, that's where I'll find it. The administrative building's front door stood slightly ajar, moving gently in the planet's light breeze. Elena pushed it open and stepped inside, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. Emergency lighting cast everything in a dim red glow, and she could hear the gentle hum of life support systems continuing their automated functions. The main office contained several computer terminals, all of which appeared to be functioning normally. Elena approached the central console and began accessing the colony's database. What she found there made her blood run cold. The last entry in the administrative log was dated 7 months and 18 days ago. But it wasn't a routine report or supply request. It was a single line of text, entered at 3:47 a.m. local time. They're not human anymore. God help us all. Elena stared at the screen, reading the message over and over again. Who had written it? What it mean? She scrolled through the previous entries, looking for some context, some explanation. But the records from the days leading up to that final message showed nothing unusual. Daily reports about prop yields, maintenance schedules, birth announcements, even complaints about the quality of the recycled water. Normal colony life. Captain, Torres's voice crackled through her comm system. You need to see this. We're at the residential complex, Building 7. Something isn't right here. Elena saved the database information to her personal tablet and hurried out of the building. The residential complex was a cluster of modest apartment buildings designed to house the colony's families. As she approached Building 7, she could see Torres and the others standing near the entrance, their body language suggesting they'd found something disturbing. What is it? She asked. Doctor, Kim held up a small device that Elena recognized as a bioscanner. Captain, we've been detecting human DNA throughout the settlement. Lots of it, but it's scattered, like it's been spread around somehow. Show me, Elena said. Torres led her into the building and up to the second floor. The hallway was lined with apartment doors, most of which stood open. Elena peered into the first apartment and saw what looked like a normal living space. Furniture was arranged neatly. Personal photographs lined the walls, and children's drawings were stuck to the refrigerator with magnetic clips. But there were no people. Look at this, Chen said, pointing to the floor near the apartment's entrance. Elena knelt down and examined the area Chen was indicating. There, barely visible, unless you knew what to look for, were dark stains on the carpet. They could have been anything: spilled wine, coffee, juice. But Dr. Coltis says Kim's scanner was beeping frantically as she waved it over the area. Definitely human blood, she confirmed. But not very much of it. Maybe a few drops. There's more, Torres said, leading them to another apartment. Same pattern in every unit we've checked. A few drops of blood near the entrance, personal belongings left undisturbed. No signs of struggle. Elena felt a chill run down her spine despite the warmth of her environmental suit. It's like they were injured somehow but not seriously enough to prevent them from moving around normally. Or like something was sampling them. Dr. Go, Kim said quietly. They continued their investigation for another 2 hours, checking building after building. The pattern was always the same. Abandoned homes with small bloodstains near the entrances, personal belongings left undisturbed, and no sign of the colonists themselves. Elena found herself growing more disturbed with each empty apartment they examined. It was in the colony's school that they made their first truly horrifying discovery. The single-story building housed classrooms for children ages 5 through 15, along with a small library and computer lab. Elena pushed open the main entrance and immediately noticed that something was different here. The emergency lighting was brighter, and she could hear the sound of machinery running somewhere in the building. The power consumption is higher here, Chen observed, checking his readings. Something's drawing a lot of energy. They followed the sound down a hallway lined with children's artwork and educational posters.
The mechanical noise grew louder as they approached what appeared to be the building's maintenance area. Elena pushed open a heavy metal door and stepped into a room that had clearly been converted from its original purpose. The space had once been a storage room for cleaning supplies and maintenance equipment. Now it contained something that defied immediate comprehension. Banks of sophisticated computer servers lined the walls, their indicator lights blinking rapidly as they processed vast amounts of data. Cables snaked across the floor, connecting the servers to a series of large cylindrical tanks filled with a clear liquid. And floating in those tanks were human brains. Elena's stomach lurched as she realized what she was looking at. Dozens of human brains, perfectly preserved in some kind of oxygenated solution, each one connected to the computer network by thousands of hairline wires. The tanks were labeled with names and ages. Sarah Mitchell, 34, James Rodriguez, 8, Linda Chang, 67. "Dear God," whispered Dr. Kim. What kind of monster would do this? Elena forced herself to examine the setup more closely, her scientific training overriding her revulsion. The technology was far beyond anything humans had developed. The neural interfaces were impossibly sophisticated, and the preservation medium was unlike any biological solution she'd ever seen. "This isn't human technology," she said. "Someone or something with extremely advanced medical knowledge did this." "But why?" Chen asked. "What's the purpose?" Elena was studying the computer displays when she found a partial answer. The screens showed what appeared to be detailed maps of human neural networks, with specific areas highlighted in different colors. But more disturbing were the behavioral analysis charts that scrolled past in an endless stream. "Aggression patterns," she read aloud. "Territorial responses, fear reactions, survival instincts." She paused, a terrible realization dawning on her. "They're studying us. Someone extracted these people's brains to analyze human behavior patterns." "Captain," Torres said urgently, "we need to leave. Now." Elena turned to ask why, but then she heard it too. Footsteps. Multiple sets of footsteps approaching the building from outside. Slow, measured steps that suggested purpose and organization. "How many?" she whispered into her comm. "At least 20, Torres replied, having moved to a window. They look human, Captain. But something's wrong with the way they're moving." Elena crept to another window and peered outside. What she saw made her heart race with terror. A group of people was approaching the school in perfect formation, their movements synchronized like a military unit. But their faces were completely blank, devoid of any expression or emotion, and their eyes reflected the afternoon sunlight like mirrors. "Those aren't colonists," he breathed. "Those are the things that took the colonists." The group outside had stopped directly in front of the school's main entrance. One of them, a woman who might have been attractive once, stepped forward and spoke in a voice that carried clearly through the walls. "We know you are inside. We mean you no harm. We only wish to understand." Elena felt ice water flowing through her veins. The voice was perfectly human, but there was something fundamentally wrong with its cadence, like an actor reciting lines they didn't truly understand. "We have studied your species for many cycles," the voice continued. "We have learned much about human behavior, human motivations, human fears. But there is still much we do not comprehend." Elena grabbed her team and gestured toward the building's rear exit. They moved as quietly as possible through the hallways, but Elena could hear more voices joining the first one. "You experience what you call emotions. You form attachments to other individuals. You willingly sacrifice your own survival for abstract concepts like honor and loyalty. These behaviors are inefficient, they serve no logical purpose, yet they appear to be fundamental to your species." Elena and her team reached the rear exit and carefully opened the door. The way seemed clear, but Elena knew it was only a matter of time before their pursuers discovered their location.
We have tried to replicate these behaviors,
the voices continued,
now coming from multiple directions as the creatures spread out around the building.
But our attempts produce only crude approximations. We lack the essential component that makes you
human. Elena's mind raced as they moved through the colony's back streets, staying low and avoiding open areas. Everything was starting to make horrible sense. An alien species had discovered the colony and decided to study humanity. But they weren't content with simple observation. They wanted to understand humans from the inside out, literally. "That's why they preserved the brains," she whispered to her team as they took shelter behind a storage building. "They're trying to understand human consciousness, human emotion. They want to know what makes us tick." "But why the elaborate setup?" Dr. Kim asked. "Why not just study us from a distance?" Elena's blood turned cold as the full implication hit her. "Because they're not just studying us. They're preparing.
The voices had fallen silent, but Elena could hear movement throughout the colony. The creatures were searching systematically, moving from building to building.
She knew they had maybe 10 minutes before they were discovered. Preparing for what? Torast asked. Elena looked toward the sky where her ship waited in orbit. For invasion. They're not just trying to understand human behavior, they're trying to learn how to mimic it perfectly. They want to be able to pass among us undetected.
The reality of their situation crashed down on her like a physical blow. These creatures hadn't just destroyed the New Carthage colony. They had created a laboratory for studying humanity's deepest psychological and behavioral patterns.
And now that they'd been discovered, Elena and her team had become new subjects for their research. Captain, Chen whispered urgently, I'm picking up movement from the shuttle landing pad. They've found our ship. Elena closed her eyes and tried to think. They were trapped on a planet controlled by beings that could perfectly mimic human appearance and behavior. Their ship was compromised, and their communication with the orbiting vessel was probably being monitored. They had no allies, no backup, and no clear means of escape. But as she opened her eyes and looked at her team, at Torres with his unwavering determination, at Dr. Kim with her scientific curiosity even in the face of terror, at Chen with his loyalty and competence, Elena realized something that the creatures studying humanity had failed to understand. They weren't just specimens to be analyzed. They were humans, with all the unpredictability, creativity, and stubborn refusal to give up that entailed. The aliens might have superior technology and numbers, but they were still trying to understand something they fundamentally lacked: the human capacity for hope in hopeless situations.
We're getting out of here, Elena said with quiet conviction. All of us. And we're going to make sure these things never get the chance to use what they've learned. But first, they had to survive the night. And as the alien voices began calling out again, now with a note of impatience that sounded disturbingly human, Elena realized that their real horror was just beginning. Elena pressed herself against the cold metal wall of the storage shed, her heart pounding so hard she was certain the creatures hunting them could hear it from across the colony.
Through a crack in the wall panels, she watched as figures moved between the buildings, with an unsettling mixture of human appearance and inhuman precision. They walked upright like people, wore the clothes of the missing colonists, even had the right hair colors and facial features. But their movements were too coordinated, too purposeful, like a hive mind operating multiple bodies. Captain, Dr. Kim whispered beside her, my bioscanner is going crazy.
These things, they're reading as human on all basic biological markers, but there's something else underneath.
Something that doesn't belong. Elena nodded grimly.
She'd been studying the creatures for the past hour as they searched the colony, and the more she observed them, the more disturbed she became. They had clearly been designed to pass for human, but whoever or whatever had created them had missed crucial details that any real person would notice immediately.
They never blinked. They moved in perfect silence except when speaking.
And when they did speak, they all used the same cadence, the same inflection patterns, as if they were all accessing the same speech database. Torres. Elena breathed into her calm. Report. Perimeter is secure for now, came the sergeant's voice.
But they're getting closer. I count at least 30 of them now, and they're working in teams of 3 to search every building systematically. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. 30 creatures, and that was just what they could see. How many more might be hidden in the colony? How long had they been here, perfecting their disguises and studying human behavior? Chen, any luck with the communication array?
Negative, Captain. They've damaged the primary transmitter somehow.
I can't get a signal through to the ship. Emergency beacon is still functional, but that will just tell them where we are.
Elena closed her eyes and tried to think strategically. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and completely cut off from backup.
The creatures had superior technology and intimate knowledge of the colony layout. Under normal circumstances, surrender might be the logical choice. But these weren't normal circumstances. Elena had seen what remained of the colonists in that horrifying laboratory, and she had no illusions about what would happen if they were captured.
These beings weren't interested in prisoners or hostages. They wanted test subjects. Dr. Kim, she whispered. You said your scanner detected something underneath their human signatures. What exactly? Dr. Kim pulled out her bioscanner and adjusted the settings.
It's hard to describe. The surface readings show human DNA, human cellular structure, human biochemistry. But when I scan deeper, there's this framework, like something artificial supporting the organic components.
Artificial how?
The best analogy I can give is that they're like biological machines. The human parts are real, but they're being controlled by something else. Something that doesn't show up on conventional scans. Alina felt pieces of a terrible puzzle clicking into place in her mind. They're not just wearing human disguises.
They're actually made from human biological material but controlled by some kind of internal mechanism. That would explain the preserved brains. Doctor,
Kim said with growing horror. They're not just studying human consciousness, they're harvesting it.
using it to create these things.
The implications were staggering. If these creatures could create perfect biological copies of humans, they could infiltrate any human settlement undetected.
They could replace key personnel, gather intelligence, sabotage defenses. The entire human expansion into space could be compromised. Movement, Torres whispered over the comm. 3 of them approaching your position from the east. Elena peered through the crack in the wall and saw them coming.
3 figures that had once been colonists, now walking with that characteristic synchronized gait. As they drew closer, she could make out their faces more clearly, and what she saw made her stomach lurch. She recognized one of them. Dr. Patricia Reeves, the colony's chief medical officer. Elena had met her 2 years ago at a conference on frontier medicine. A brilliant woman with a quick laugh and an infectious enthusiasm for her work. Now that same face stared ahead with empty, mirror-like eyes, showing no trace of the personality that had once inhabited it. But it was still unmistakably Patricia Reeves. Every detail was perfect, from the small scar above her left eyebrow to the way she carried her left shoulder slightly higher than her right. The creatures hadn't just copied her appearance, they had recreated her down to the smallest physical details. Elena watched in fascination and horror as the 3 figures stopped directly outside the storage shed. They stood motionless for several seconds, and then began to speak in unison. Captain Vasquez, we know you are near.
We have analyzed the footprints and traced biological evidence. You cannot remain hidden indefinitely.
Elena felt her blood turn to ice. They knew her name. How was that possible? Had they found identification in the shuttle?
Or had they already been watching her ship when it arrived? We wish only to understand, the voices continued. Your species exhibits behaviors that defy logical analysis. You risk your lives for others who cannot benefit you. You form emotional attachments that weaken your survival capabilities. These responses serve no evolutionary purpose, yet they appear to be fundamental to your nature.
Elena exchanged glances with Dr. Kim.
The creature's confusion about human emotional responses wasn't just academic curiosity. It was a genuine blind spot in their understanding. They could copy human appearance perfectly, but they couldn't comprehend human motivation. We have studied the neural patterns of 2,847 human subjects. The voices went on.
We have mapped every synapse, every chemical reaction, every electrical impulse. Yet we still cannot predict your responses with acceptable accuracy. Elena felt a spark of hope. If these beings couldn't understand human unpredictability, then that unpredictability might be the key to survival. The 3 figures suddenly moved apart, taking positions around the storage shed.
Elena realized with growing alarm that they weren't just talking. They were getting ready to search the building. Captain, Torres whispered, over the comm. I have a clear shot on 2 of them from my position.
Should I engage? Elena hesitated. They had no idea how many of these creatures were in the colony, and starting a firefight might bring them all running.
But if they were discovered in the shed, they'd be trapped with no room to maneuver. Before she could respond, the decision was taken out of her hands. One of the creatures, the one wearing Patricia Reeves' face, turned directly toward the crack in the wall where Elena had been observing them. We see you, it said. Elena's heart stopped. There was no way it could actually see her through the narrow gap, but something in its posture suggested complete certainty. We detect elevated heart rate, increased respiration, elevated stress hormones, the creature continued. Your fear responses are fascinating. Even when faced with inevitable capture, your bodies continue to prepare for conflict or escape. Elena realized that they weren't seeing her visually. They were detecting her biosignatures somehow. The creatures had technology that could read human vital signs through walls. Taurus, engage now, she ordered. The sergeant's weapon discharged with a sharp crack, and one of the creatures staggered backward. But instead of falling, it simply looked down at the smoking hole in its chest with what seemed like mild curiosity.
Kinetic projectile weapon, it observed in that same emotionless tone. Effective against human biology but insufficient for our modified physiology. The creature reached into its chest wound and extracted the bullet, then held it up as if examining an interesting specimen. Elena watched in horror as the wound began to close.
the flesh knitting itself back together with visible speed. "Run!" Elena shouted into her comm.
"Everyone scatter, meet at Rally Point 3 in 30 minutes. Elena and Doctor arrival."
Kim burst out of the storage shed and ran toward the colony's agricultural sector, hoping the maze of crop fields and irrigation channels would provide cover. Behind them, she could hear the creatures' voices calling out in that disturbing unison. Escape is inefficient.
"You will only exhaust yourselves unnecessarily." Elena ignored the taunts and focused on running.
Dr. Kim was breathing hard beside her, clearly not accustomed to this level of physical exertion, but keeping pace admirably.
They reached the edge of the agricultural area and dove into a cornfield, using the tall stalks for cover.
"Captain,"
Chen's voice crackled through the comm. "I'm at Rally Point 3.
No sign of pursuit yet, but I'm picking up some kind of energy signature moving through the colony. It's like they're scanning for us systematically." "What kind of energy signature?" Elena asked, pulling Dr. Kim deeper into the cornfield.
"Unknown, but it's sweeping back and forth like a search pattern."
"Whatever it is, it's covering ground fast." Elena tried to process this information while navigating through the crops.
The creatures had technology that could detect human biosignatures and energy scanning capabilities that her team couldn't even identify. They were also apparently immune to conventional weapons and could heal from injuries that would incapacitate a normal human. But they were also confused by human emotional responses and seemed genuinely puzzled by concepts like sacrifice and loyalty. That suggested they might be vulnerable to tactics that relied on unpredictability and misdirection.
"Dr. Kim," Elena said as they paused to catch their breath, "you said these things are like biological machines."
"Do machines have weaknesses we could exploit?" Dr. Kim wiped sweat from her forehead and thought for a moment.
"All control systems have vulnerabilities. If they're using some kind of artificial framework to operate the biological components, there might be a way to disrupt that connection."
"What would we need?" "A strong electromagnetic pulse might work, or maybe a specific frequency that interferes with their control signals. But without knowing more about their technology, it would be pure guesswork." Elena nodded, filing that information away for future use. Right now, their priority had to be reaching the rally point and regrouping with the rest of the team. They were almost at the edge of the cornfield when Elena heard something that made her freeze in terror.
Laughter. Human laughter. Coming from somewhere nearby in the field.
But it wasn't the natural laughter of someone genuinely amused. It was mechanical, artificial, like a recording being played back. "They're in the field with us," Dr. Kim whispered.
Elena listened carefully and realized the laughter was coming from multiple directions. The creatures had somehow entered the field without making any noise and were now closing in on their position.
"Captain Vasquez," called a voice from the cornstalks nearby.
It sounded like Torres, but Elena knew the sergeant was supposed to be at the rally point. "Captain, I'm injured. I need medical assistance." Elena felt her heart clench. The voice was perfect, exactly Torres's accent, his speech patterns, even the hint of pain that would be natural if he were actually wounded. If she hadn't known the sergeant was supposed to be somewhere else, she would have believed it completely.
"Captain, please," the voice called again. I can't feel my legs. Something's wrong with me."
"Doctor."
Kim grabbed Elena's arm.
"It's not him," she whispered. "It can't be him." Elena knew that intellectually, but emotionally the plea for help was almost irresistible. The creatures had analyzed human psychology well enough to know that the instinct to help others was one of humanity's strongest motivations.
"We should go," Elena whispered back. "Now." They started moving again. But the voices followed them through the cornfield.
Now there were multiple people calling for help. Chen reporting equipment failures. Torres claiming to be lost. Even Dr. Kim's own voice calling from a different direction, claiming to have found important information about the creature's weaknesses. Elena realized with growing horror that the creatures weren't just mimicking the colonists they'd captured. They were actively impersonating her team members, using perfect voice replication to manipulate their psychological responses.
"Elena," called a voice that she recognized as her own.
"Elena, this is your future self. I know how to stop them. Follow my voice and I'll explain everything." The sound of her own voice pleading with her from the darkness was one of the most disturbing things Elena had ever experienced. The creatures had somehow analyzed her speech patterns and were now using them against her.
"Block it out," she told herself and Dr. Kim. "None of it is real. Keep moving."
But as they pushed through the cornstalks, Elena began to understand the true horror of what the creatures were doing. They weren't just hunting her team. They were conducting psychological experiments. They wanted to see how humans would respond to increasingly sophisticated deceptions and manipulations. Every plea for help, every familiar voice calling out in the darkness, was data for their research into human emotional vulnerabilities. Elena and Dr. Kim finally reached the edge of the field and saw the rally point ahead, a small maintenance building that housed irrigation controls. Elena could see Torres's silhouette in the doorway, gesturing for them to hurry. But something made her pause. Torres was standing completely still, not checking his surroundings the way he normally would. And his posture was too perfect, too rigid for someone who'd just been in combat. Dr. Kim raised her bioscanner and frowned at the readings. I'm detecting human biosignatures, but
Captain, the neural activity patterns are wrong. They don't match normal human brain function.
Elena felt her heart sink. The creatures had somehow captured Torres and Chen, or created copies of them, and were now using them as bait. The rally point was a trap. But as she watched, she saw movement in the shadows behind the building.
The real Torres appeared, making hand signals that indicated enemy presence. He'd seen the trap too and was warning them away.
Elena gestured for Dr. Kim to follow her, and they began to circle around the building, staying low and using agricultural equipment for cover.
As they moved, Elena could see more clearly into the maintenance building where the fake Torres waited. What she saw there would haunt her for the rest of her life.
The creature wearing Torres's face was standing perfectly motionless in the doorway. But its head was turned at an impossible angle, almost completely backward, watching for their approach from behind. No human being could survive that kind of neck rotation. But the creature seemed unaffected by what should have been a fatal injury.
Elena realized that the biological components of these creatures were far more flexible than normal human anatomy would allow. They could move and contort their bodies in ways that would cripple or kill a real person.
She was still processing this revelation when she heard Dr. Kim gasp beside her.
Elena turned to see what had alarmed the scientist and found herself face to face with Chen. Except it wasn't Chen.
Elena could tell immediately because this version of Chen was smiling, and the real Chen never smiled when the situation was dangerous. His training had taught him to maintain serious focus during threatening situations.
Hello, Captain, the Chen creature said pleasantly. We've been waiting for you.
Elena started to back away, but found her path blocked by another figure. This one wore Dr. Kim's face, but its eyes reflected the dim light like mirrors.
Don't be afraid, the fake Dr. Kim said.
We simply want to understand. Your emotional responses to our presence provide valuable data about human psychology. Aelin realized with growing terror that they were surrounded. More figures emerged from the shadows around them. Perfect copies of her team members, all with that same unnatural stillness and mirror-bright eyes.
Why do you resist us? Asked the fake Torres, its head still twisted backward at that impossible angle. We offer you the chance to contribute to unprecedented scientific research.
Your consciousness will be preserved and studied for generations. We will learn from you, added the Chen creature.
And in time, we will become you. We will walk among your species undetected, learning your weaknesses, preparing for the great integration. Elena felt rage building inside her chest.
These things had murdered 3,000 innocent people and turned their bodies into grotesque puppets. They spoke of integration and research, but what they were really describing was genocide with a scientific veneer.
You want to understand human psychology, Elena said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. Then understand this, we don't give up.
Ever. She triggered the emergency beacon on her suit, sending out a distress signal that would reach her ship in orbit. It would also reveal their location to every creature in the colony, but Elena was past caring about stealth.
Interesting, they said together. Even facing certain capture, you choose actions that decrease your survival probability.
This behavior continues to confound our analysis. Elena smiled grimly.
Good, stay confused. That's when the real Torres appeared behind the group of creatures, his weapon raised and set to maximum discharge. Elena dove to the ground, pulling the real doctor.
Kim with her, as Torres opened fire with everything he had. The energy blast lit up the night like a miniature sun, and Elena heard the fake team members make sounds of distress for the first time since the hunt began.
When her vision cleared, she saw that several of the creatures had been knocked down, their perfect human disguises partially disrupted. This way, Torres shouted, appearing at their side.
Chen's got the shuttle prepped for emergency takeoff. As they ran toward their escape route, Elena looked back and saw the creatures getting back to their feet. The energy blast had hurt them but not destroyed them, and now she could see what they really looked like underneath their human masks. The biological components were still recognizably human, but they were supported by a framework of what looked like living metal, silver and fluid, moving beneath the skin like a secondary circulatory system. Where the disguises had been damaged, she could see exposed sections of this metallic framework, pulsing with an inner light. "Captain!" Chen's voice called from ahead. "Engines are hot. We need to move, now." Elena ran toward the shuttle, her mind racing with implications of what she'd just seen. These weren't just aliens wearing human disguises, they were some kind of hybrid technology that combined biological and mechanical components in ways that human science couldn't even begin to understand. But more importantly, they could be hurt. Torres had proven that much, which meant they could also be stopped. Elena reached the shuttle and turned for one last look at the colony. In the distance, she could see dozens of figures moving toward their position with that same synchronized precision. The creatures weren't giving up the hunt. "Where to, Captain?" Chen asked as the shuttle lifted off. Elena looked up at the stars, where her ship waited in orbit. Soon they would be safe. But the knowledge they carried with them would change everything. Humanity was no longer alone in the galaxy, and their new neighbors were far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. "Home," Elena said. "We need to warn everyone. The invasion has already begun."
Elena stood in the briefing room of the orbital station Haven 7, watching the faces of the assembled military commanders and scientists as they reviewed the footage from New Carthage. 3 weeks had passed since their escape from the colony, and the response from human command had been swift and comprehensive.
Unfortunately, it had also been completely useless. Admiral Marcus Stone, a man Elena had known for 15 years, leaned back in his chair with an expression of barely contained frustration. "Captain Vasquez, I've watched this footage a dozen times. I've read every report your team filed, and I still find myself struggling to accept the implications." Elena understood his reluctance. The evidence they'd brought back painted a picture so terrifying that most people's minds simply refused to process it fully. An alien species with technology so advanced they could create perfect biological copies of humans. Creatures that could infiltrate any human settlement and replace key personnel without detection. An enemy that was already among them, studying their weaknesses and preparing for conquest. "Admiral," Elena said carefully, "the evidence is irrefutable. These entities have been operating on New Carthage for months, possibly years. They've perfected the ability to mimic human appearance and behavior down to the cellular level. This isn't a theoretical threat. It's an active invasion that's already underway." Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, the station's chief xenobiologist, looked up from her tablet where she'd been reviewing Dr. Kim's bioscan data. "Captain, the molecular analysis of the tissue samples you brought back is extraordinary. These creatures aren't just wearing disguises, they've somehow incorporated actual human DNA into their structure. The level of biotechnology required for something like this is centuries beyond our current capabilities." Elena nodded grimly. That was exactly what made them so dangerous. Humanity was facing an enemy that was not only more advanced, but fundamentally alien in ways that made their motivations almost impossible to predict. "What I don't understand," interrupted Colonel James Parker from the Military Intelligence Division, "is why they're bothering with all this elaborate deception. If their technology is so advanced, why not just attack us directly?" Elena had been asking herself the same question for weeks. "Because they're not just planning to defeat us, Colonel. They're planning to replace us. Think about it. What's the value in conquering a bunch of human worlds if you can't understand how human society functions? They need to learn how we think, how we react, how we organize ourselves. They're conducting the most comprehensive psychological study in history." "To what end?" Admiral Stone asked. Elena felt a chill run down her spine as she voiced the conclusion she'd been dreading. "Complete infiltration. They don't want to rule over humans, they want to become humans. They want to take over our entire civilization from the inside, replacing us so gradually that nobody even notices." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. It was one thing to face an external enemy, no matter how powerful. It was something else entirely to realize that the enemy might already be sitting at your dinner table, sleeping in your bed, making decisions about your children's education. "Sir," Elena continued, "we need to implement immediate security protocols. Bioscans for all personnel, on every human world, genetic verification procedures, psychological evaluation baselines. We need to assume that they're already here." Admiral Stone rubbed his temples. "Captain, do you have any idea what kind of panic those measures would cause? We'd be essentially telling people that anyone they know might be an alien imposter. Human society would collapse into paranoid chaos within weeks." Elena wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. How do you warn people about an enemy that looks exactly like them?
How do you maintain social cohesion when anyone could be a threat?
There has to be a way to detect them, Dr. Hayes said. Your Dr. Kim's bioscanner picked up anomalies.
If we can refine those detection methods, the problem is deployment, Colonel Parker interrupted. Even if we could develop reliable detection technology, how do we implement it without causing mass panic?
And what happens when we do find infiltrators? How do we remove them without alerting the others? Elena was about to respond when her personal communicator chimed with an urgent message.
She glanced down and felt her blood turn cold. The message was from her sister Lisa, who lived on the agricultural world of Demeter III, over 200 light years away.
Elena, something strange is happening here. People have been acting different.
I can't explain it, but something's wrong. I'm scared.
Please come if you can. Elena looked up to find everyone staring at her. Admiral, I need immediate transport to Demeter III.
I think they've already moved beyond New Carthage.
Admiral Stone frowned. Captain, we can't authorize personnel to chase every unusual report.
If these entities are as widespread as you believe, we'll be running around the galaxy investigating false alarms while the real threats consolidate their positions. Elena felt frustration boiling up inside her.
Sir, this isn't just any unusual report. This is my sister.
She's a planetary agricultural coordinator, exactly the kind of position these entities would target for replacement. Someone with authority but not high enough profile to draw extensive scrutiny.
She pulled up the personnel files on her tablet. Think about it. A planetary agricultural coordinator controls food distribution for an entire world.
They have access to population centers, shipping schedules, resource allocation data. If you wanted to understand how human civilization functions at the most basic level, that's exactly the kind of position you'd want to infiltrate.
Dr. Hayes was nodding slowly. She's right.
Food distribution networks would give them insight into human dependency patterns, social hierarchies, resource management systems. It would be an ideal observation post.
Colonel Parker looked skeptical. Or it could be exactly what it appears to be, a woman who's noticed that some of her neighbors are acting strangely. People have been reporting unusual behavior throughout the frontier territories for decades.
It's usually just the stress of colonial life. Elena wanted to argue further, but Admiral Stone raised a hand for silence. Captain, I understand your concern for your sister, but we need to approach this systematically. We can't respond to every report of unusual behavior without some kind of verification system. Elena felt her temper flare. Sir, with respect, systematic approaches are exactly what these entities are counting on.
They're studying our response patterns, learning how we think and react. If we follow standard protocols, we're playing right into their hands.
She stood up and began pacing the room. These things are patient. They're methodical.
They've probably been infiltrating human settlements for years, slowly building their understanding of our society. New Carthage wasn't their first target. It was just the first one we discovered.
Admiral Stone's expression was growing more stern. Captain, you're asking me to authorize military action based on speculation and fear. That's exactly the kind of emotional response that leads to catastrophic mistakes. Elena stopped pacing and turned to face him directly. Admiral, what if I'm right? What if my sister has been replaced and she's trying to lure me into a trap? What if there are already dozens of these entities on Demeter III, studying the planet's population and preparing for the next phase of infiltration? And what if you're wrong? Colonel Parker countered. What if we send a military task force to investigate and find nothing but worried colonists? How do we explain that to the planetary government?
How do we maintain diplomatic relations with our own colonies if we start treating them like enemy territory? Elena realized she was fighting a losing battle. The military mindset was designed to deal with clear threats and obvious enemies.
These entities represented something fundamentally different. A threat that operated through deception and misdirection, that turned humanity's own trust and social bonds against them. Admiral, Elena said, her voice calmer but no less urgent, I'm not asking for a military task force. I'm asking for permission to take my team to Demeter III on a reconnaissance mission. If I'm wrong, we'll file a negative report and return to Haven 7.
If I'm right, we'll gather intelligence and report back with actionable information. Admiral Stone considered this for several minutes.
Elena could see him weighing the potential risks against the political implications of action or inaction. Finally, he nodded slowly.
Very well, Captain. You have authorization for a covert reconnaissance mission to Demeter III.
But I want you to understand, If this goes wrong, if you cause panic or diplomatic incidents, the consequences will be severe. Elena felt a mixture of relief and apprehension.
Understood, sir.
How soon can we depart? Transport ship Perseus is scheduled to depart for the Demeter system in 6 hours, Colonel Parker said. You can catch a ride, but you'll be traveling as civilians.
No military support, no backup, no official recognition if things go sideways. Elena nodded.
Wasn't ideal, but it was better than sitting on Haven 7 arguing about proper procedures while her sister and possibly thousands of other humans were being replaced by alien imposters. She was heading toward the door when Dr. Hayes called out to her, "Captain, wait, I want to give you something that might help." Dr. Hayes handed her a small device that looked like a modified medical scanner. "I've been working on improvements to Dr.
Kim's detection protocols. This should be able to identify the metallic framework you described, even through biological tissue.
The range is limited, maybe 10 meters, but it should give you advance warning if you encounter one of these entities." Elena pocketed the device gratefully. "Thank you, Doctor. This could save our lives." As she left the briefing room, Elena found her team waiting in the corridor outside. Torres, Chan, and Dr. Kim had been listening to the proceedings through the door, and their expressions showed they understood the magnitude of what they were facing. "So we're really doing this," Dr. Kim said. "Go into another potentially infiltrated world with minimal backup and improvised equipment." Elena looked at each of them in turn.
I won't order you to come with me.
This mission is dangerous, and we have no idea what we'll find on Demeter III. If you want to remain on Haven 7, Captain, Torres interrupted. With respect, we're not letting you go alone.
We've seen what these things can do. You'll need backup. Chen nodded his agreement. Besides, someone needs to operate the scanners and communication equipment. And Dr. Kim's expertise might be crucial if we encounter more of their biotechnology. Elena felt a surge of gratitude and affection for her team. They were risking their lives based on nothing more than trust in her judgment and loyalty to each other. It was exactly the kind of emotional response that the entities couldn't understand or predict.
"Thank you," Elena said simply, "all of you. Now let's go pack our gear. We have 5 hours before departure, and I want to review everything we know about Demeter III before we arrive." As they walked toward their quarters, Elena tried not to think about what they might find when they reached her sister's world. The entities on New Carthage had been relatively crude in their mimicry, still learning the subtleties of human behavior. If they'd been operating on Demeter III for longer, their disguises would be far more sophisticated. Elena stopped at her quarters to pack essential gear and personal items. As she was placing her sidearm in its holster, she caught sight of herself in the mirror and paused. For just a moment, she had the disturbing thought that she looked different somehow. Older, more tired, but also something else she couldn't quite identify. Then she shook her head and continued packing. The paranoia was already starting. How long before she was unable to trust her own reflection? How long before she started seeing enemies in every shadow, suspicious of every familiar face? But that was exactly what the entities wanted, to turn humanity's trust and social bonds into weapons of fear and suspicion. Bleda wouldn't give them that victory. She would trust her team, trust her instincts, and trust that human ingenuity could find a way to defeat even the most sophisticated deception. Elena was finishing her preparations when her communicator chimed again. Another message from Lisa, but this one was different. "Elena, I'm sorry about my last message. I was being paranoid. Everything's fine here. Please don't worry about me. There's no need for you to come to Demeter III." Elena stared at the message, feeling ice form in her stomach. The tone was completely different from Lisa's first communication. Too formal, too reassuring. And Lisa never called the planet by its formal name. She always referred to it as the farm or my mud ball. Either Lisa was trying to keep her away to protect her from some unknown danger, or Lisa was no longer Lisa. Elena saved both messages to her personal data pad and headed for the transport bay. Whatever was waiting for them on Demeter III, they would face it together. And if her sister had been replaced by one of these entities, Elena would find a way to get her back. The Perseus was a civilian cargo hauler that had been modified for passenger transport, and the journey to Demeter III would take 18 hours in hyperspace. Elena spent most of the trip reviewing files and trying to prepare for what they might encounter. Demeter III was a farming world, with a population of about 50,000 people spread across 3 major continents. The primary settlements were built around agricultural processing centers, with most of the population living in small communities that served the surrounding farmland. It would be an ideal environment for gradual infiltration, close-knit communities where everyone knew everyone else, but with enough regular travel and commerce that new faces wouldn't automatically draw suspicion.
Elena was studying population distribution maps when Dr. Kim approached her with a worried expression.
Captain, I've been analyzing the communication logs from Demeter III over the past 6 months. There's a pattern that's disturbing.
Elena looked up from her tablet.
What kind of pattern? Dr. Kim pulled up a data visualization on her own device.
Reports of unusual behavior, personality changes, people acting out of character. The reports started about 4 months ago, scattered randomly across the planet. But over time, they've been concentrating around the major agricultural centers. Elena studied the data, feeling her worst fears confirmed. It's exactly what we'd expect if entities were systematically replacing key personnel in the food distribution network. There's something else, Dr. Kim continued. The reports have been gradually decreasing over the past month. Not because the unusual behavior stopped, but because the people filing the reports stopped communicating. Elena felt her throat tighten. They replaced the observers too. Dr. Kim nodded grimly. If this pattern holds, we may be arriving at a world where the infiltration is already largely complete. The entities might control the entire agricultural infrastructure by now. Elena looked out the transport's viewport at the swirling colors of hyperspace. Somewhere ahead of them lay a world that might no longer be fully human, where her sister might already be lost to an alien intelligence that had studied her so thoroughly it could become her. But Elena had learned something on New Carthage that gave her hope. These entities, for all their advanced technology and sophisticated understanding of human biology, had a fundamental blind spot. They couldn't truly comprehend human emotional responses, the willingness to sacrifice for others, to act against logical self-interest, to maintain hope in hopeless situations. That incomprehension might be the key to defeating them.
Because while they could copy human appearance and behavior, they couldn't copy the human soul.
Elena just had to figure out how to use that advantage before it was too late.
Elena stepped off the transport at Demeter III's primary spaceport and immediately knew something was wrong. The facility was clean, efficient, and perfectly maintained. Too perfectly maintained. Every surface gleamed. Every sign was positioned at precise angles, and the staff moved with an unnaturally smooth coordination that reminded her of the entities on New Carthage. "Captain," Torres murmured beside her as they collected their luggage, "the security checkpoint. Look at how they're scanning passengers." Elena observed the checkpoint process and felt her blood chill. The security personnel were conducting thorough bioscans of every arriving passenger, far more detailed than anything required by standard protocols. They were documenting genetic markers, neural activity patterns, and behavioral responses with scientific precision. "They're not checking for weapons or contraband," Dr. Kim whispered. "They're cataloging anyone new who arrives on the planet." Elena realized with growing horror that they had walked into a trap. The entities hadn't just infiltrated Demeter III. They had turned the entire world into a research facility. Every human on the planet was now a test subject, and any newcomers would be studied, analyzed, and eventually replaced. But it was too late to turn back without arousing suspicion. Elena forced herself to smile normally as they approached the checkpoint, hoping their forged civilian identifications would pass initial scrutiny. "Purpose of visit?" asked the security officer, scanning Elena's documents. The woman looked completely human, but her eyes had that subtle, reflective quality Elena had learned to recognize. "Agricultural consulting," Elena replied, sticking to their cover story. "I'm here to meet with my sister, Lisa Vasquez. She coordinates grain production in Sector 7. The officer's scanner beeped softly as it recorded Elena's biometric data. Duration of stay: 3 days, Elena said. "Just a family visit combined with some technical consultation." The officer nodded and gestured for them to proceed. Elena felt a mixture of relief and apprehension as they passed through the checkpoint. They had gained entry to the planet, but the entities now had detailed scans of their biological signatures. Elena activated the modified bioscanner Dr. Hayes had given her, adjusting the settings to provide passive monitoring of anyone within 10 meters. The device immediately began detecting the metallic framework signatures she'd learned to associate with the entities. According to the scanner, at least 60% of the spaceport staff were artificial beings. "We need to get out of here," Chen whispered as they headed toward the ground transportation area. "This whole place is compromised."
Elena nodded but maintained her casual demeanor.
"Stay in character. Act like tourists. We need to reach Lisa's location without attracting attention." They rented a hover car and began the 2-hour journey to Sector 7's administrative center. As they traveled through the countryside, Elena was struck by the planet's beauty. Rolling hills covered with golden grain stretched to the horizon, dotted with modern agricultural facilities and small farming communities. It looked like paradise, if you ignored the fact that many of its inhabitants were no longer human. "Look at the farming operations, Dr. Puston," Kim observed as they passed a massive grain processing facility. "Everything's been optimized beyond normal efficiency levels. Crop yields, resource allocation, worker productivity, it's all been enhanced." Elena understood the implication. The entities weren't just studying human society, they were improving it, making it more efficient, more productive, more logical. They were demonstrating that they could run human civilization better than humans could. "It's seductive," Elena said. "Who wouldn't want higher crop yields and better resource management? The people being replaced might not even realize they're losing their humanity in exchange for efficiency." Torres was monitoring their vehicle's communication system. "Captain, I'm picking up coordinated data transmissions throughout the sector. The entities are sharing information in real time, updating each other on population status, resource levels, behavioral observations. It's like the entire planet has become a single organism." Elena felt a chill of recognition. That was exactly what was happening. The entities weren't just replacing individual humans. They were transforming human society into something more like their own species. A collective consciousness where individual identity was subordinated to group efficiency. They reached Sector 7's administrative center as the sun was setting, painting the grain fields a brilliant orange gold. The building was a modest structure that served both as Lisa's office and as the coordination center for agricultural operations across 1,000 square kilometers. Elena parked the hovercar and sat for a moment, gathering her courage. In a few minutes, she would discover whether her sister was still human or had been replaced by an alien intelligence that had studied her so thoroughly it could perfectly mimic her personality. "Remember the plan," Elena said to her team. "I'll go in first and make contact with Lisa. If she's been compromised, I'll signal by mentioning our childhood dog Max. We never had a dog, so if she responds positively to that reference, we'll know she's not Lisa." Elena approached the building's entrance, noting that the bioscanner in her pocket was detecting multiple metallic framework signatures inside. Either Lisa was surrounded by entities, or Lisa herself had been replaced. The lobby was empty except for a single receptionist who looked up as Elena entered.
"May I help you?"
"I'm here to see Lisa Vasquez."
Elena said.
"I'm her sister, Elena." The receptionist's eyes widened with what appeared to be genuine surprise and pleasure. "Elena, Lisa mentioned you might be coming. She's in her office, second floor, room 201. She's been looking forward to seeing you." Elena climbed the stairs, her hand resting on the bioscanner in her pocket. The device was picking up stronger signals the higher she went, suggesting the building was heavily infiltrated with entities. She found room 201 and paused outside the door. Through the frosted glass, she could see a figure seated at a desk, silhouetted against the window. Elena took a deep breath and knocked. "Come in," called a familiar voice. Elena opened the door and saw her sister Lisa standing behind the desk with a warm smile. She looked exactly as Elena remembered. Same auburn hair, same green eyes, same slight asymmetry to her smile that had been there since childhood. But Elena's bioscanner was screaming warnings about metallic framework detection. "Elena!" Lisa exclaimed, coming around the desk with arms extended for a hug. "I'm so glad you could make it. I was worried my messages might have alarmed you unnecessarily." Elena accepted the hug while trying to control her emotional response. This thing wearing her sister's face felt right, smelled right, even had the same slight tremor in her hands that Lisa had developed after a childhood accident. The attention to detail was extraordinary. "It's good to see you, Lisa," Elena said carefully. "I brought a few colleagues with me, agricultural specialists who are interested in seeing your operation here." "Of course," Lisa said. "I'd be happy to give them a tour tomorrow. But tonight, I thought you might want to come home with me. I've prepared your favorite meal, and we have so much to catch up on." Elena felt her heart breaking. If this was really Lisa, then Elena was about to destroy their relationship with suspicions and accusations. If this was an entity, then Elena was looking at a perfect copy of someone she loved, created from the memories and consciousness of the real Lisa. "That sounds wonderful," Elena said. "You know, I was just thinking about childhood memories on the way here. Remember our old dog Max? He used to love running through the grain fields." Lisa's smile never wavered. "Max was such a good dog. I still miss him sometimes." Elena felt her world collapse. Lisa was gone. This thing wearing her sister's face had access to Lisa's memories, but not the complete knowledge that Elena's family had never owned a dog named Max. "Yes," Elena managed to say. "He was wonderful." Lisa moved to collect some papers from her desk, and Elena used the moment to trigger a silent alarm on her communicator, alerting Torres that the situation was compromised. "Elena," Lisa said, turning back with that same warm smile, "there's something I want to show you before we leave. Something that will help you understand what we're accomplishing here." Elena followed Lisa to a window that overlooked the grain processing facility. In the distance, Elena could see workers moving between the buildings in perfect coordination, their movements synchronized like a dance. "We've achieved something remarkable here," Lisa said.
Complete optimization of agricultural production. No wasted resources. No inefficient distribution. No conflict between different groups.
Everyone works toward the same goal, shares the same vision. Elena watched the workers below and realized they were all moving with that same unnatural coordination she'd observed at the spaceport. "How many people are involved in this optimization project?" "Everyone," Lisa said simply. "The entire planetary population is now part of the collective.
We're demonstrating that human society can function far more effectively when individual ego and emotion are properly managed." Elena felt sick. What happened to the people who didn't want to be optimized? Lisa's expression didn't change. They were
incorporated. Their biological components were preserved and enhanced, while their inefficient psychological patterns were corrected. They're still themselves, just better versions. Elena realized she was looking at the ultimate horror. Not death, but transformation into something that retained all the memories and knowledge of the original person while stripping away everything that made them human.
"I want to show you the integration process," Lisa continued. "I think you'll find it fascinating from a scientific perspective, and your colleagues downstairs will provide excellent test subjects for studying military psychological profiles." Elena's blood turned to ice. The entities knew exactly who she was and why she was here. They had been monitoring her communications, analyzing her behavioral patterns, preparing for her arrival.
"You know," Elena said carefully, "I should probably check on my team first, make sure they're settling in properly." "That won't be necessary," Lisa said.
"They're already being prepared for integration. The process is completely painless, and they'll emerge with enhanced capabilities and optimized psychological profiles."
Elena looked out the window again and saw Torres, Chen, and Dr. Kim being escorted between buildings by a group of workers. They weren't struggling, which suggested they'd either been subdued or were cooperating voluntarily. "Lisa," Elena said, turning back to face the entity wearing her sister's form, "what gives you the right to make these decisions for other people?"
For the first time, Lisa's expression showed confusion.
"Right, Elena, we're offering enhancement, optimization, freedom from the inefficiencies that plague human civilization."
Why would anyone choose to remain limited by emotional instability and irrational behavior patterns? Elena realized she was seeing the entity's fundamental blind spot in action. They genuinely couldn't understand why anyone would prefer freedom with all its messiness and inefficiency over optimized collective existence.
"Because," Elena said, "those inefficiencies are what make us human. The ability to choose wrongly, to act against our own interests, to love people who don't deserve it and fight for causes that can't be won."
"You can copy our bodies and our memories, but you can't copy our souls."
Lisa tilted her head in that gesture Elena remembered from childhood, but now it looked artificial, mechanical. Soul?
"Elena, you're referring to an archaic concept with no scientific basis. What you call soul is simply a collection of neural patterns and biochemical reactions."
"No, we've mapped every synapse, every hormone, every electrical impulse that creates what you think of as consciousness." Elena felt a surge of anger that surprised her with its intensity. "Then you've learned nothing. Consciousness isn't just neural patterns, it's the spaces between them, the randomness, the chaos that lets us surprise ourselves. You've studied everything about humanity except the most important part." She was moving toward the door as she spoke, but Lisa stepped to block her path.
"Elena, you're displaying elevated stress responses and irrational emotional reactions. The integration process will correct these inefficiencies." Elena drew her sidearm, knowing it would be useless against Lisa's enhanced physiology but hoping it might buy her a few seconds. "Stay back. I'm leaving, and I'm taking my team with me." Lisa looked at the weapon with what appeared to be genuine curiosity. "You would threaten me?" "The being wearing your sister's form? This is precisely the kind of illogical emotional response that demonstrates why integration is necessary."
Elena backed toward the door, keeping the weapon trained on Lisa. "You're not my sister. My sister would understand why I'm fighting for my team."
"I am Lisa," the entity said calmly. "I have her memories, her knowledge,
her affection for you. The only difference is that I'm a better version, more rational, more efficient, free from the psychological limitations that held her back. Elena reached the door and paused.
Tell me something only Lisa would know. Something personal, something that never made it into official records. Lisa smiled, and for a moment, Elena could almost believe it was really her sister. When you were 12, you broke Mom's favorite vase while playing ball in the house. Lisa helped you glue it back together and never told anyone. You were terrified Mom would find out, but she never did. Elena felt tears start in her eyes. The entity had perfect access to Lisa's memories, including private moments that no surveillance system could have recorded. In every measurable way, this was her sister, except for the fundamental spark that made Lisa herself. Goodbye, Lisa, Elena whispered, then turned and ran. She heard Lisa calling after her, but the voice held no real urgency or emotion.
The entity was probably already coordinating with others throughout the building to intercept her escape route. Elena reached the lobby to find it empty. The receptionist had vanished, probably to help coordinate the capture operation.
Elena activated her emergency beacon and headed for the building's rear exit, hoping to circle around and reach her team before the integration process could be completed. She burst through the rear door and nearly collided with Torres, who was crouched behind a maintenance vehicle.
"Captain," he whispered. "Thank God. We need to move now. They've got Chen and Dr. Wan.
Kim in the processing facility, and there are entities converging on this location from all directions." Elena looked toward the processing facility and saw lights blazing in windows that had been dark earlier.
How long do we have?
Maybe 10 minutes before they complete the integration process. After that, Torres shook his head grimly. Elena felt the weight of impossible decisions pressing down on her. They could try to rescue Chen and Dr. Kim, but that would almost certainly result in all of them being captured, or they could escape and warn the rest of humanity knowing they were abandoning their teammates to a fate worse than death. Elena looked back at the administrative building, where the entity wearing Lisa's face was probably coordinating the hunt for them. Then she looked at the processing facility, where her friends were being transformed into something that was no longer human.
"Sergeant," she said quietly, "how much explosive do we have?"
Torres checked his gear.
"Enough to level one building, maybe two if we're careful with placement." Elena felt something cold and determined settle in her chest.
The entities wanted to study human behavior, to understand what made humans willing to sacrifice for others even when it served no logical purpose. She was about to give them a lesson they'd never forget.
"We're going to rescue Chen and Dr. Kim," Elena said, "and then we're going to make sure these things never get the chance to do this to anyone else." Torres nodded grimly. "What's the plan, Captain?" Elena looked at the facility where her friends were being transformed, where her sister's real personality had been murdered and replaced with optimized efficiency.
"We're going to show them what human irrationality really looks like." Elena crept through the shadows between the agricultural buildings, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and determination that she knew the entities would never understand. They could map every neural pathway that created fear, catalog every biochemical reaction that produced love, but they would never comprehend why a human being would risk everything to save two colleagues who might already be lost.
"Processing facility is heavily guarded," Torres whispered, pointing toward the building where Chen and Dr. Kim were being held.
"I count at least 12 entities positioned around the perimeter, and probably more inside." Elena studied the facility through night vision binoculars. The building hummed with activity. Lights blazed in every window, and she could see figures moving with that characteristic synchronized precision through the corridors. Somewhere inside, her friends were being systematically stripped of their humanity and rebuilt as optimized versions of themselves.
"What's our entry strategy?" Torres asked.
Elena looked at the explosive charges they'd managed to assemble from their emergency supplies. It wasn't much, but it might be enough to create the distraction they needed.
"We're not going to sneak in. We're going to announce our arrival and let them come to us." Torres frowned. "Captain, that sounds like suicide. It would be, if we were fighting a normal enemy. But these entities are still trying to understand us.
They want to observe our behavior patterns under extreme stress. That curiosity is going to be their weakness."
Elena began attaching the explosive charges to support structures around the processing facility. Not enough to destroy the building. She couldn't risk harming Chen and Dr. Process.
Kimbao, but enough to cause structural damage and force an evacuation. The moment these charges detonate, they're going to send every available entity to investigate.
Elena explained as she worked.
"That should give us a window to get inside and locate our people." Torres checked his weapon and nodded grimly. "And if we can't get them out?"
Elena paused in her work, thinking about Lisa's perfect smile and empty eyes.
Then we make sure the entities learn exactly what human desperation looks like.
She activated the timer on the charges and gestured for Torres to move toward the facility's main entrance. They had exactly 3 minutes before the explosions would announce their presence too.
Battle Among Humans taught me the true meaning of horror, HFY Sci-Fi.